28 momentarily. We are going live on our website. And Mr. Mayor, if you'd like to go ahead and start the meeting.
Very good, thank you. I'd like to welcome everybody to the City of St. Helena Special Joint City Council and Planning Commission meeting. This is Tuesday, March 23rd, 2021. And Cindy, will you help us with the instructions for remote and also for the Spanish language interpretation?
Certainly. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so for community members that would like to participate, they would just dial 669-900-6833 at the prompt. You would enter 865-4410-6994, which is the meeting ID. Once you enter that, you would press the pound key. And then to give public comment, you would press *9 to speak. And if I could just pull one other item up and so this afternoon's meeting will have live Spanish interpretation. To access the interpretation, you will need to use the Zoom application from either your cell phone, tablet, or computer. Instructions on how to use the Zoom app are listed in English and Spanish on the agenda posted on the city's website. Once you join the meeting from the Zoom application, you will see a small globe at the bottom or top of your screen. Click on the globe and you will be able to access the live interpretation. Marcy and Claudia are our interpreters for this afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Now we'll move to the Pledge of Allegiance. If folks could mute your microphone and place your hands on your heart and repeat with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And we'll move to our roll call, please.
Mayor Ellsworth.
Here.
Vice Mayor Doring.
Here.
Councilmember Chateau.
Here.
Hall.
Here.
Hardy.
Here.
Planning Commissioner Chair Pont.
Here.
Vice Chair Hale.
Here.
Commissioners Anderson.
Here.
Segura.
Here.
Rothfeld.
Here.
Thank you. And now we have a new part of our agenda that is not on the printed on the special agenda, but this is the adoption of the agenda. So checking to make sure there's no changes to the agenda. I'll look to our city clerk to make sure that no changes have come.
No changes as presented.
Okay, and if we could have a motion for adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
And a second, please.
Second.
Okay, very good. Now, in a special meeting, the public forum section under California law, public comments at special meetings are limited to subjects on the agenda only, and therefore public comment will take place during consideration of the item, where each person's comments shall be limited to 4 minutes. So we'll move to the special the item today of the special meeting. This is item 5.1. The state of California requires that local governments adequately plan to meet the existing and projected housing needs of all economic segments of the community. The purpose of the housing element is to identify the community's current and future housing needs, to state the community's goals and objectives with regard to housing production, rehabilitation, and conservation to meet those needs, and to define the policies and programs that the community will implement to achieve the stated goals and objectives. The housing element is an element of the city's general plan, which provides guiding policy for land use and resource management within the city. Unlike the other general plan elements, the housing element is subject to detailed statutory requirements and mandatory review by a state agency, the California Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, and is updated on a schedule mandated by the state Therefore, this element was not updated as part of the city's recent 2040 general plan. The city of St. Helena is starting to process to update the city's housing element. Objectives of this update include prioritize and craft an updated housing element meeting all state and regional requirements and regional housing needs assessment, RHNA, RHNA, targets for the planning period that runs 2023 through 2031, ensure proper public engagement, complete the required California Environmental Quality Act CEQA documentation, use the city's limited resources efficiently, and ensure the update is completed on time and is approved by the California Department of Housing and Community Development. To perform the update, the city conducted a competitive bid process and selected a consulting team led by Mintier Harnish LP. Mintier Harnish brings a wealth of experience in California and our region in the preparation of housing elements and general plans. During this first joint City Council Planning Commission meeting, the consultants will provide an overview of the housing element update process, including an overview of housing element requirements, legislative guidelines, project schedule, and public outreach. A general overview of the housing element update is contained in the attached newsletter for the project. As the project develops, information will also be available on the St. Helena Housing Element website, which can be found at sthelenahousing.com. And Mr. Prestwich, are you going to take us into this?
It's going to be Planning Director DeRosa.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. DeRosa.
Thank you. I'm very excited to have this very first meeting to kick off our housing element. I know there's been a lot of discussions and I am going to just have very brief words because I'm going to hand this over to the project manager, senior planner, Aaron Heacock, and the consultant team, Mintier Harnish, who will guide us through the discussion today. And I will be available to answer any questions or help facilitate the conversation. Thank you, Mayor.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. And Mayor, I apologize for having so much text on the agenda. We won't let that happen again. So just wanted to let you know moving forward, it'll be a briefer title.
Thank you.
So as already mentioned, this is the first of a series of study sessions, focus groups, and workshops related to the 6th cycle housing element update. Tonight is essentially an introduction and overview of what housing elements are, the update process, and to solicit feedback and comments from the council, commission, and the public. With that, I'd like to introduce Rick Rust and Amy Yang from Mintier Harnish, the consultant who we selected for this process, who will be presenting a PowerPoint for you this evening. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Rick Rust, as I mentioned, with Mintier Harnish, and today's purpose is to get us all started on a 2-year update to your housing element. And we're also going to be updating the safety element of your general plan to bring in conformance with some other recent changes in state law. Joining me today is Amy Yang, who will be the other key planner that's going to be part of this effort. Just to give you a quick update of Mintier Harnish, we were established in 1985 and have been doing general plan updates throughout the Northern California area. Since that time, it includes, from a housing element standpoint, includes at least 80 housing elements that we've done around the state. And so we're very familiar with the requirements of state law. And we've actually got a number of 6th cycle. So that's the area we're in right now, is number 6, as far as the number of times these elements have been updated in the state. So we'll be guiding you through this. Again, we're going to be your technical advisors, if you will, making sure that we meet all the requirements of state law, but at the same time relying on the community and the council and commission to guide us on crafting this plan to represent the needs and desires and vision for the city of St. Helena. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about just housing element basics. We'll go into a little bit more detail about what is RHNA and what that means for the future of the community and what we have to plan for. Looking at meeting our housing needs and some preliminary looks at that, the community engagement process and the overall update process going forward. And then some time at the end, if we could solicit some input from council members and commissioners just about your expectations for the housing element and what you would like to see come out of this, or issues that you'd like to make sure are addressed. So as far as some general basics, And the mayor has actually hit part of my presentation, so I can skip through a little bit of it, but it is just part of your general plan. It's on equal footing. All elements are supposed to be created equal, but it was mentioned there are a significant amount of state law, and that amount of state law grows annually as the legislature tries to address the shortfall of housing that's throughout California. So we have a number of laws that have changed even since your general plan was recently updated, and we'll have to make sure that we follow that, as well as making sure that you meet the requirements for schedule. The housing element has a very specific timeline for when this needs to go forward. And you've got plenty of time actually to get this document done and to have adequate public engagement throughout the development of the element. Some jurisdictions in other parts of the state have been very pressed to get their elements done in time. You actually have started it through staff getting this going and are in good position to have a very organized and thoughtful process. Now, some basics of the housing element. This is to provide an assessment of both your current and future housing needs. So we will, as far as current, we will be looking at your production of housing today, as well as in the recent past, to see what has been happening in the community as we go forward, and that may lead us to understand better what will happen in the future. We'll also be looking at projections of the future, and this kind of reflects some of the RHNA components, as well as where the market wants to take the community and what are the development possibilities for housing in the area. We'll be looking at identifying opportunities and constraints on housing production. This is very important to understand the community and what are the things that hold us back from providing housing, and what are some opportunities that we haven't taken full advantage of as we go forward. We'll look at establishing goals, policies, and programs to meet the needs identified. So in other words, we'll go through your existing plan to make sure we understand what has worked and what hasn't, and we'll update that as well as provide new plans and programs that fully meet state law. When we look at strategies, there's a couple of key areas that we want to look at. One of them, and an important one, is that we make sure that we conserve and improve upon our existing affordable housing stock. It's a rare commodity in most communities, and we want to make sure that the housing that we do have that is affordable, those that live in our communities, can be maintained long term. So there are going to be some programs that focus on that aspect. We'll look at how we can maximize housing opportunities throughout the community. The housing element is supposed to address the housing needs for all incomes and all needs within the community. This includes special populations, such as those with large families and large household needs, those with disabilities, seniors within the community that need to have move-up housing or move within the community and stay active in the community still. So we want to make sure we cover the full range of needs within the community. We want to look at assisting in the provision of affordable housing. While the housing element does cover all income levels within the community, it's often those that are in the lower income categories that need additional assistance to make those housing units come to turn within the community. Part of that is looking at removing governmental and other constraints to housing investment. Are there things that are happening within the community that are stopping us from achieving the housing that we would like to achieve within the community? And it's also important that we provide for fair and equal housing opportunities throughout the community. An important part of this effort will be looking at the housing sites inventory. Part of the RHNA is that we have to provide adequate housing sites to promote the development of this housing. This RHNA number is something we need to provide for in this 8-year planning period. So how do we find the right sites that can meet that need? We obviously can look at planned and proposed projects, even projects that are currently in the pipeline as far as applications, can be a good foundation for meeting that RHNA need. And when we look through that, there are things that are already in the pipeline as of June of next year that can be counted towards the 6th cycle. We'll also be looking at identified vacant land within the community, and we'll look at underutilized sites. And these are areas where we may be able to take a location and intensify the use on the site, or perhaps it's an abandoned building that can be repurposed or a different type of use that can be redone. We already covered those last two, and covered basically we'll review your existing goals and policies to make sure that all of them are on track. You've actually done quite a bit of this work with your annual housing reports. So every year in April, you have to have these turned into HCD. And they provide a wealth of information about what has worked and what hasn't worked. And so we'll be wanting to look at how to adjust what you already have, because it's often easier to refine a program you already are using as opposed to coming up with a new program. So we'll make the best use of what you currently do and refine it as necessary. There's probably about 20 different laws that have come into play since the last time you did your housing element. Wanted to point out a couple that are significant, we feel, as we go forward in the housing element. We'll address all of them, but the ones with the little sunshines there are important ones for us. The additional housing sites analysis requirements. This is a requirement by the state for sites that you've used in previous housing elements. So if you've used an underutilized site in the last 2 housing element cycles, or if you used a vacant site in the last housing element cycle, they require additional analysis and some by right development opportunities for those sites in order for you to carry them forward. So this is the idea that we can't just let these sites continue to be counted and nothing moving forward on them. So the state has introduced a by right development for the use of these sites in further looks. Affirmatively furthering fair housing is a major component of housing elements in this 6th cycle. And this is about looking at how we provide for equal housing and fair housing throughout the community. This ranges from looking at the demographics of the community, looking at the access to schools and access to public facilities, the exposure to environmental pollutants, etc. So making sure that we are providing a fair and enjoyable quality of life for all those in the community. This is something that the state is still working on defining exactly how they want this addressed in housing elements. And with the ones that we've already done in the 6th cycle, it's been an evolution as we've worked with HCD to fine tune what they want. And that has been changing. So we hope by the time we get to wrapping yours up that we'll have a full and good guidance on exactly what's required. But we have been moving this forward with the state nonetheless in the past. No net loss zoning is another important component. You've probably heard about your RHNA numbers and how many of these are going to be required within your community. No net loss refers to the idea that if you had a site that was going to provide 50 affordable housing units, and when it got built, it only produced 20 affordable housing units. If that was part of your RHNA calculations, you now have to come up with that missing 30. The 30 that you had promised the state you would provide, but no longer can because that site's been used up. So you have to be able to rezone those properties within 90 days of that change. So we need to keep a buffer. And the state is talking about wanting to have a buffer of 15 to 30% above your RHNA numbers as something that you don't necessarily have to rezone right now, but something that you should have on standby to address this no net loss component. The safety element, there's a number of items that have to be addressed here as far as adaptation and resiliency. On my next slide, towards the bottom, looking at evacuation routes and as they work within our community. So how do we take care of not only the aspect of putting down wildfires or avoiding wildfires, but how do we survive them as far as evacuation routes or evacuation centers? And how do we recover from them? These are things that are new to the safety elements to be added in. And that's something that will also be done as part of this update process. Accessory dwelling units going to the top there, there's a wide number of rules that have come down on this. You may have heard the terms of ADUs that can be provided. They've been called granny flats or second units. Many people have them maybe in their backyard where they have a separate unit that could be rented. These have been used in many communities for successfully meeting lower income housing requirements, and they could be something that might be part of the solution set for St. Helena as well. The state and some of these new laws also allow for what they call junior ADUs, which is basically renting out a room within your house and counting that as a complete unit. The advantage of these is while they're still on one parcel, each of these units counts as a unit towards your RHNA numbers. So let's talk a little bit about your RHNA numbers. As you may know, the state of California comes up with an overall housing need, and then they distribute that housing need to the different regions within the state, often through a council of governments or an association of governments. In this case, ABAG, or the Association of Bay Area Governments, and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission were charged with the development of the RHNA for this overall Bay Area region. So from the state numbers, ABAG then distributed these out to the local governments. Now, so far, these are in draft form. They've gone through several iterations, with the latest published iteration being in February. The actual final numbers, or the actual number you'll be looking to provide, will come out in the spring of this year. We don't have a definite timeline, but they should be very soon. And the numbers I'm going to be showing you are based on this February draft. So this is a look at St. Helena's numbers as far as the number we're looking at. We've got a total of 254 units, of which you can see the breakdown of those below you here. And you can see in the background there, we have from Napa and Marin County a wide range of what's being required. Now this slide here was included in your package. I did add the second table at the bottom there because we had a similar presentation last night to Pleasant Hill on their upcoming housing element. And they found this to be an interesting component as well. So what we're showing you on the top is just the change. So what is the difference between your 5th cycle, or your current housing element, and your upcoming 6th cycle, or the ones that we're working on right now? And you can see by the numbers, you've gone up significantly as far as the amount of units that need to be provided for within the community. Up to 223 more units need to be produced under the 6th cycle than were done in the 5th. What the bottom chart is showing you is not as part of your printout, but it shows the shift in the income levels that's part of this table. So in the past 5th cycle, where you had 42% that were in the above moderate category, you can see now that's only 26%. And the same kind of number shift has happened now in the very low income category. So not only have your numbers grown quite a bit, but the income levels have shifted down to the lower income ranges on the overall graph as far as what's being expected. So that's going to be an important thing for us to consider and look at, because it will change what we look at for the types and locations of units and the kinds of programs needed to support those units. As far as meeting those needs, there's a range of opportunities. And again, we're just a month into the project, so we don't have the answers yet, but often things fall into the categories of looking to reduce the constraints on housing production, looking to provide additional support to housing programs that you already have, looking at updating city regulations to meet state requirements. These could be changes to, for instance, density bonus laws in order to bring them in line with state requirements, changing to parking requirements for emergency shelters and such, looking to identify additional housing sites, or looking to modify the densities allowed within housing sites. And a number of jurisdictions have had to follow several of these components, if not all of them, in order to meet their RHNA numbers. So as we said, we need to account for 254 housing units at various income levels. We'll go through, and this siting analysis will happen more towards the second half of this year. And this will be done in combination with working with the focus group for the community, working with the council and commission. And also we've got a number of community workshops that I'll touch on in a minute. One of those will be dedicated towards this siting analysis. Part of what we'll do with this is to identify, not only we'll go through and identify all your properties, we'll look at what is vacant, we'll identify what is underutilized or what might be able to be considered for redevelopment, if you will. We also need to look at identifying the constraints on development. And these could be both physical constraints, such as a flood zone or a protective easement, or they could be regulatory. We want to determine what's the remaining balance. So after we take this first look, we will try to optimize the obvious things. We'll talk to HCD about what are the number of accessory dwelling units we can project for the future and that they would be willing to accept. We'll look at your existing and proposed projects or things that you have applications for or property owner interest in, and use those as a starting point for our numbers. And then we'll look at your vacant land using your current general plan and zoning designations and calculate out what is the baseline or the likely projection right off the bat. And then that gives us kind of the shortage that we may be facing. And that number of shortage will be the item that we'll have to talk about in our sites analysis. So just to give you an example, this is the sites analysis that was done for your current housing cycle, which went from 2015 to 2023. And these are all the locations that were considered for both vacant and underutilized sites. Now, we can certainly start and will start from your current site analysis. Obviously go through first and find out what things have actually been built on and are no longer available to us. But we'll look at what other changes might be here and if there's additional items that need to be added to our inventory. This is the final key sites. There were a number of key sites that were looked at for medium and high density residential. So these are usually the items that can provide for your moderate income through your lower income housing sites. The state usually looks at density as a stand-in for affordability. And typically we're looking at densities of up to 30 dwelling units per acre to be affordable for a lower income family. Touch a little bit on community engagement, what we have proposed to get the community engaged in this overall housing element. As we go through this, there are a number of City Council Planning Commission study sessions that will be done at strategic locations to make sure that the decision makers are well informed and involved in the direction that's looking at. The community's also looked at forming a focus group. The focus group will be a sounding board for us, a group of people that will work through the entire element and help us to take community input and other thoughts for the community and work those into the element itself. We'll have 5 community workshops throughout the process, and these have been set up so that the community has the ability to join us to learn more about the process and to be engaged as the process and the element itself are being developed. So we're not just coming to the end and surprising everybody with what we think the answers are. The community will be well informed and well engaged in helping us come up with the solutions that best fit St. Helena. There will also be a number of hearings with the Planning Commission and hearings with the City Council as we go forward with this project and its final adoption. Now, these are the community workshops. So our first workshop will be looking towards next month, and it'll be on housing concerns and needs, the chance for the community to be involved in telling us what are the key housing issues and opportunities that we need to address. Workshop 2 will look at vacant and underutilized sites assessment. So this will be the time when we come back and talk to the community about the math that we've come up with, what we found for those items that are obvious, the existing projects, the existing zoning, the ADU potentials, and what else we need to acquire, and get their inputs on where they think might work. We'll have a whole workshop that'll talk about affirmatively furthering fair housing, looking at how we can enhance the provision of fair housing across the community. We'll have a workshop specifically on the safety element itself and the proposed updates to that. And then there'll be a workshop on the public review draft housing element. Ways for the public to participate. We have a lovely business card you see illustrated on the right side of the slide. All the commissioners and council members and other interested individuals will be given a stack of these. It gives you quick access to the project website, which will be the host for a lot of information about the project going forward. So keep an eye out for those. Those should be coming into staff this week, and they'll be getting those out to you to pass out. There will be a series of newsletters that help to inform the community about what's going on. The project website, which I will walk you through a little bit in just a minute. City staff will use social media outreach and normal channels that the community normally uses to get information out to the community. We'll be working with local groups, and we'll actually at our first workshop engage the community on helping us identify other local groups to work with to make sure we get information out to everybody that has an interest in the success of housing in the community. Virtual events, those are obviously happening right now. They're over this 2-year period. We're hoping we're going to have a conversion where we'll be in person again. But even so, we may find that we're going to do both formats long term. We might have a Zoom view of an actual in-person workshop for those that want to do either way. During our development, we'll also host a number of online surveys or other interactions on the website where people can go in and provide information. We'll also provide surveys in a written format for those that may not have access to a computer or the ability to do that kind of interaction. And then, of course, there'll be a number of study sessions and hearings, which will all be open to the public and for public comment. The website provides a wide range of information about the housing element itself and what we're going to be striving for. The website has just recently been brought up, and we're still adding materials to it and can certainly enhance that as we get requests from the public. These are the two basic newsletters. The first newsletter is out now. It's available on the website on the documents page. We normally get these workshops out for our first focus groups, which would be later that's actually in April. The next public workshop is actually, I think, in June. I'll show you the schedule in just a minute. But the newsletter is actually done a little bit ahead of time, and so we could pass that out for this meeting. We are working on a Spanish translation version of this newsletter, and we expect to have that up in the next number of days or early next week. So that will also be available on the website itself too. So sthelinahousing.com is the website address. So if you're to go into the website, this is what it looks like on the homepage with a number of menus across the top. Housing Element Basics gets you familiar with what Housing Element's about. The Participate tab is where we would list all the meetings, and information from each meeting, such as this PowerPoint presentation, will be posted onto that. Documents is right now you can go download the newsletter, and next week you would have access to the Spanish language newsletter as well. And future documents will also be posted in this location. Resources gives an overview of some materials that are helpful to learn more about housing elements. And the FAQ, or frequently asked questions, provides a list of questions we get from the community or common questions we hear about housing elements. The orange tab on the right side allows you to enter your email address and be added to our email list. We will provide you an update for any upcoming events or document releases so that you're always familiar with what's going on. There's a green box which provides comments. So if you'd like to provide a comment, and copy of these comments go to the consulting team, as well as to the city's staff to make sure that everybody's kept in the loop about community concerns and comments. So any time of the day or night, if something strikes you, you're able to go onto the website and provide input on it whenever you would like. The website's also set up to do auto translation. So from the key button on the top, you can translate into Spanish. This is a machine learned change because of how often the website updates. So grammar is probably not as perfect as if a human was doing it, but it does provide a good overview, and it does translate all the menus as well as all the materials that are on the site itself. And then finally, on the bottom, the little blue person in the bottom provides accessibility components for those that may have harder time using a computer, whether that be to provide bigger text or more spacing, dyslexic support, tonal support. That's all available by clicking on the blue button there. So we're trying to enhance everybody's accessibility to this website and use it to the biggest extent possible. I mentioned the focus groups. They'll be used as a sounding board. They'll get into the elements in a little more detail. It's to supplement the community input. So this focus group will be made up of one council member, one planning commissioner, and other members of the community. So it gives us a good flavor of community input, as well as being able to get their inputs on specific topics. Anything that comes from the focus group will be shared out with the public as far as future community workshops, as far as the future documents and the hearings on the document itself. Getting to the end here, we want to look at our item. I think I had mentioned earlier about the first community workshop. I wanted to correct myself. That's actually going to be in early June. Our first focus group will be in April. That's the date I was talking about earlier. And then you can see our first joint study session is down there towards the end of March. So this is going on over a 2-year project period. As I mentioned, we don't have our actual RHNA numbers to get really deep into the siting until this springtime. AGBAG publishes the final numbers, but we'll be moving forward with this and getting the community involved throughout the process. You can see on the schedule towards the bottom where it says workshops, you'll see how the community's input in those workshops is sprinkled throughout the development of the housing elements. That's really important for us, really important, we think, for the community to make sure that they're part of the action in developing this housing solution for St. Helena. So as far as next steps on our side, we're busy working with ABAG. They put together standardized data sets. And so we're working on data collection with your staff and assessment of that information. We'll also be conducting a review of existing goals and policies and programs based on your reporting, and also what staff feels has worked and not worked within the community. Preparing for that first community workshop and this housing sites identification. So again, we're really early in the process, but it is important for us to make sure that we talk to the decision makers and over this venue to the public about what's coming up, so there's an expectation about the next steps. Mentioned earlier, Aaron is your main point of contact for the city. He's the project manager for the city on this housing element update, and we've shown his email address here. It's also listed on the website. So if you didn't have a chance to write it down, you certainly can go to the website for the public and can write to Aaron directly. Or again, you can use that button on the website to send comments, and those will go a copy to Aaron as well. So that's the quick highlight of what we're doing for you over the next couple of years. We are going to talk about, we wanted to have a council member and a commissioner as part of the focus group. As I understand it from your city attorney, you're not going to actually appoint somebody tonight. That's going to be an action for a future meeting, but I'll leave to be corrected on that. And then again, with the mayor's concurrence, we would enjoy to get some input from the council and the commission about expectations and concerns that you would like to make sure that we're aware of and that we can address going forward in the housing element. And thank you very much for the time tonight. We'd be glad to talk about any questions or answers or inputs you might have.
Mr. Rust, thank you very much for that comprehensive presentation. Really terrific to get that overview. So thank you.
Thanks.
I'm going to just touch base quickly with Mr. Walsh, our city attorney. So in terms of process on appointment to the focus groups, if you could walk us through if you have a suggestion on that.
So I'm happy with you having a discussion about maybe soliciting interest from council members and planning commissioners to see who's interested in that position tonight and having a conversation about that. We would just save the formal appointment for the next meeting of each respective body. We could just put it on the consent calendar with a short staff report. So there's a formal appointment that's on an agendized item. So you're welcome to have that conversation today, see who is interested, and then the planning staff can just come back at your next meetings to formally appoint that person. Okay, very good. So if we look at and think about who may be interested, those who are interested, to put your names forward. I'm seeing Commissioner Anderson from the, and I'm seeing Vice Mayor Doring from the council side. If there are others, please put your names for Ms. Commissioner Segura from the Planning Commissioner side. And so then once we get everybody who's interested, then we can get into a little bit of a discussion and go forward from there. Are there any other folks who are interested? Not seeing any. Is it of value to see if there are any council comments or questions on the presentation before we get a little deeper into the discussion about perhaps who would take those focus group spots? Are there any initial comments or questions for Mr. Rust or for Mr. Heacock on the presentation? I'm not seeing any hands.
So it looks like we have one city council member who's interested. That's Vice Mayor Doring. And we have Commissioners Anderson and Segura interested on the Planning Commission side. Is there a way, Mr. Pont, as the chair of the Planning Commission, in terms of a thought about how to choose a representative?
Well, I would suggest we could do this as a regular item at our next Planning Commission meeting. Our agendas have been rather light of late, so I think if this is a full item, we can discuss it there and get our representative back to you as soon as we're able to meet. So since we don't have only one volunteer, I'd rather not take the council's valuable time here and discuss it among our planning commissioners. I would prefer to do it at a regular meeting, if that's all right with you.
Certainly okay with me. I'll just check in with our city attorney. Does that sound like a good process?
Yeah, I think that's perfect. If there's more than one person who's interested, then I think it would be worthwhile for the Planning Commission to have a discussion of the body on that issue. Okay,
very good. So with that, I'm going to open it. If I'm seeing no other comments or questions from the council or commissioners, I will open it for public comment at this point, and I'll look to our city clerk to see if we have any public comments.
I'm looking at the attendees, Mr. Mayor, to see if there's any hands that are going to be raised. And I do see a hand raised. Mr. Katsulucci, you're unmuted, so you can go ahead and address the council.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great.
Yes.
Thank you. Great meeting. Thank you. This is fantastic for St. Helena. This is what we need at this moment. And rather than comments, what I have are three very important questions, because several of us identified sites that they are important for the city. They are, primarily on Pope Street, and they are opportunity sites. So it's very important to what I would like to develop this property and what possibility they are. Therefore, I have three questions and that I would like to put out there to all of you. One will be, are you expected to maximize the sites, and what impact it will have on the community and the Pope Street Bridge when we are discussing on the east side of town? The second question is the city prepared to revisit current water policies given the situation of building new housing? And the final question would be, based on the pressure the state is imposing on building new housing, would you consider the required 20% affordable component to be built on other sites? Those are the three questions that I have, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Are we seeing additional public comment?
I do. Alicia, I'm going to allow you to speak. You can go ahead and unmute yourself and address the council.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Only because I'm so familiar or unfamiliar kind of with this process, and we're fairly new to town. So when we talk about these additional ADUs, are these only rentals, or this is also about home ownership? Because one of my concerns in looking at this is when we're talking about creating these units that people are renting, what is then the opportunity for residents to then move in towards home ownership down the road? That's one of my concerns too, is making sure that it provides an opportunity for both people who would want to rent, but also for people who would eventually like to own a home here. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Heacock or Mr. Rosa, do you have any input on that question?
Typically, the ADUs are rental units, and that's because of how they're constructed. They're built on a existing parcel of land, and so they can't be sold separately from the land upon which they sit. I suppose somebody could create a common interest development. I don't know how that would pencil out for somebody to do, but I would say typically those are going to be rental units.
Yeah, and I would just reiterate that the way our code reads is that the ADU can't be sold separately from the primary dwelling at this time.
And I'm seeing Councilmember Hardy with his hand up.
Thank you, Mayor Ellsworth. I mean, it's a new subject for consideration, but having long been a proponent of allowing for small lots in order to encourage a greater diversity of housing size and cost. Right off the top, I don't see any reason why we couldn't amend our ordinance to make it feasible to separate ADUs onto separate parcels so that they could become home ownership opportunities. I think that's something worth some consideration. Thank you.
And I'll echo that in a general sense as well, that the idea of home ownership and the ability to be a part of the American dream and building generational equity, if as we look at our housing element and our objectives here, if that's woven in, that certainly some folks renting is the good option, and certainly others would like to participate in ownership. And if we can find ways to help and be a part of that process, I think that would be a splendid thing, really. So I'm hoping that as we get deeper into this conversation, and I think with this kind of framework, we'll be able to see those opportunities. So this is, to me, it's really an exciting time as we move forward here to look at what I think is sort of a new, I'm hoping a new era in St. Helena of saying we're looking forward to seeing how we can make something work for a full spectrum community with lots of options. So thank you. Is there any other public comment before I come back to the council and commissioners?
I'm not seeing any hands raised, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, very good. So I'm seeing Vice Mayor Doring.
Just to follow on Mr. Castellucci's comments, I don't expect an answer to each one of those questions, but I do think it's important to figure out how those questions fit into the process. He basically was talking about, as he perceives it, I think, constraints to housing, particularly on Pope Street. We have the Pope Street Bridge is an issue for our community. It's a historical limited capacity bridge on the east side. He was talking about the potential to maybe revisit water policy. And then he asked about the question about whether the 20% affordable housing component could be built on other sites. So again, I don't expect answers, but where would those questions be answered in the process?
Several, as far as capacity of bridges and infrastructure, that would be answered probably through the environmental work that needs to be done to address CEQA. So there is a revision of your current general plan, EIR, to cover the housing element EIR. So some of those components be addressed there. If there's changes necessary to water policy, that actually could be a policy or program within the housing element. There is discussion in state law about infrastructure being a constraint upon the provision of lower income housing, to the point that lower income housing has to be given the priority for access to those water facilities if it came to shove. So those are things we have to look at, and how that balances out with your overall water concerns in the community. And again, water balance will be part of what gets looked at perhaps in the environmental document going forward. And the 20% question, that will be something we certainly can look at as we get into the review of existing policies and programs going forward.
Another question off topic, but I'm sorry, Maya, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just going to add on to the 20%. Mr. Caccolucci was referring to our inclusionary housing ordinance. And as part of the comprehensive zoning update, we will be taking a close look at that and updating that later this year. So, so these are all things that are happening all concurrently at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you for that extra comment. With respect to the sort of the looking again at the opportunity sites, have you seen where tours of the sites are taken, even if they're not actually on the properties, or even using drones to get a sort of a visual about some of these sites so that we can get, I'm a visual learner, and I think it benefits me to have an overview of properties. I don't know, I mean, technology is great, and I know it's probably an added cost, but maybe something to consider to do some drones or some tours of some of the sites that come up during the process.
I'm seeing Councilmember Chateau.
Thank you. I just wanted a clarifying question from Mr. Rust. Did I hear you right that you were saying with the changing state laws that the lower income housing will be given priority for our water?
If you're going forward to look at, if that's a constraint on the development of lower income housing, that would be something we're going to have to address, is how we balance that out with other kinds of housing needs within the community. So that will be something that HCD will be concerned about. If you cannot meet your RHNA needs because you cannot provide water and the water is being provided somewhere else. Now, we all know that California and many areas of the state have water issues where there's concerns with the new groundwater management controls that we're not going to be able to provide the water that we need to provide. So the housing element will need to address how we can balance out these competing needs in order to keep the communities active and economically viable as well.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hardy.
Thank you. Well, a few comments here at this point. Traffic circulation on Pope Street's been an issue from time to time for a long time, and certainly the need for a new bridge or some other improvement to circulation in terms of the connection between St. Helena and the Silverado Trail has been a part of that discussion. So, I don't think of Mr. Caccolucci's request for feedback as constituting a precise question on this point, but I do think it's something the council is going to need to look at, not simply for his project or for any particular project, but rather for in connection with implementation of the housing element and general plan as a whole. On the subject of water policies, we have taken at least the first steps to initiate a review of our existing water management policies out of concern, among, at least on my part, among other things, for being organized and prepared to meet, to have water availability for the housing projects that RHNA will require. So I think there will be potentially some changes to our water policies, but I think the goal is, right from the outset, going to be to figure out what we need to do to manage our water supply so that it's adequate to meet all our needs, including the needs for additional housing. And finally, on the subject of separate sites for required affordable units, it's a recurring theme, I would say, if I can connect the dots between just a few projects and call it a theme. But again, I'm reminded of Judge Westenhaver's comments in Ambler versus Euclid. and the awareness that those comments have brought to me of the way in which conventional zoning like ours tends to segregate our residents by wealth. I find that fundamentally undesirable. Eager to find ways we can strengthen the diversity of home prices, and with that diversity in terms of wealth in our population generally. And so my own inclination is to prefer integration within a project, but I'm not sure that's always the best solution. So I look forward to seeing how things evolve through the zoning ordinance update, and every project will require its own discussion. Thank you.
On that
Thank you.
note, Ms. DeRosa, do you know whether there's any information coming from ABAG in terms of their methodology? We obviously, I know it's proposed right now, 254 units, but it was in the 70s at one point. And the rationale, as I understand it, is that, without a whole lot of detail to back this up, is this is following along Councilmember Hardy's comment. ABAG appears to make the case that St. Helena has had a past history of discrimination and policies that have precluded affordable housing. That's been stated publicly. I have not really seen the analysis on that. I'm not sure I necessarily disagree with it or not, but it seems like a very strong statement to come out of an organization. And I'm wondering, how do we get information on that? Because I do think it's relevant to the point that Councilmember Hardy just made in terms of equity in our community.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. I may defer part of the question to Mr. Rust, but I believe all the methodology committee meetings are available online on the ABAG website. And I believe that this last round, with us receiving the higher number, absolutely was related to the income band that's disproportionate to the rest of Napa County. Do you have anything else to add, Rick?
That's what I understood from the change, looking at an equity distribution and how they were trying to adjust for some of that. And so some communities got a heavier hit, such as St. Helena, relatively in numbers, and some communities got some reductions.
But I think, following up, Paul, we'd be happy to see what documentation we can find to further kind of bridge the understanding of why, because it is a huge change and it really did catch us very much by surprise.
Is there some opportunity in looking at workshop 3, affirmatively furthering fair housing? Is this an aspect that can enter in this area? I was looking at that and wondering if there's a package of mechanisms, incentives in a workshop such as that to start looking at where adjustments can be made in zoning, et cetera. Is that an appropriate spot in terms of the community participating in that discussion?
Yes, sir. In that one, as well as the sites analysis, we're going to be mixing that conversation together about how we can be better about being a more inclusive community, how we can do better about making sure that we've cited all of our housing with respect to those that are living there and in the community. So I think that one and the sites one, as I mentioned, are both be talking about that type of subject.
Okay, thank you. Are there any additional council or commissioner comments or questions? Now I am seeing Commissioner Anderson, did I see it?
Yeah, I just had a quick question about, he said that we needed to provide for all income levels and special needs. Is that all of the income levels that are defined by RHNA, or is that all income levels?
The above moderate would cover your what's typically considered to be your market rate, but you need to meet your RHNA numbers within each of those income categories. And besides what we showed on the table, there's also a category called extremely low income, which has got incomes even lower than what's shown for very low. Often that housing needs to have some sort of a support mechanism to make it happen. Your inclusionary program may provide some of that support. But yes, we need to make sure we hit the numbers under each of those categories. Typically, extremely low is about 50% of the very low, but that can vary a little bit depending on your past circumstances.
So I'm seeing a comment from public, a public comment. I know we closed public comment, but I believe this is somebody who's not spoken. So I'm going to just take a moment, reopen public comment, and allow the speaker, Cindy, if you can do that.
Mr. Goldfarb, I'm going to allow you to speak. You should be able to unmute yourself and address the City Council.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm speaking today as a representative of our town, St. Helena, and I just wanted to indicate to the council, I think the approach that is being taken is a good one, but I don't think for this community that we should get hung up in trying to meet numbers. We should early on try to figure out what our needs are in this community and how we can make all of this work. And we can back into the numbers later on. The issue of, why did we get hit so high by the RHNA numbers? It shouldn't be a surprise to anybody in this community if you look back. We've been trying to get housing built here for the last 20 years, and we have done an awful job. The fact that our numbers were low, we couldn't even meet those numbers. So I think it's important that the city as a whole, the council and the planning commission specifically early on try to set goals and parameters as to what we want to do in this community and then match it up with what the RHNA numbers require. Because I suspect we're going to be looking at a need for the city to take a more active role, certainly hitting the lower end of the RHNA spectrum.
Thank you. Okay, is there any additional public comment before we bring it back? And then I'll close this. So I'll close the public comment. Okay. I'll bring it back now. Are there any additional comments or questions from the council or commissioners here? I am not seeing any hands. So I think that, I'm seeing Councilmember Hall.
Mr. Rust, of the 80 or so housing elements your group has been involved in, how often have you come across a requirement that's like this, that's 5 to 10-fold what we've done in the past, and how successful have those communities been?
This, for the 6th cycle, or what's currently happening in the state, the numbers have jumped up dramatically for all communities that we've run across. So this hasn't happened in the past. Most communities got numbers that were in line with their population, in line with expected bump ups. So this is kind of new territory, and you're not going to be alone. Other communities we're working for right now have had to jump up significantly, and it's caused them to look at have an open mind about how they might do it. And the comment about looking at the needs of the community and working back to the numbers, I think that's a good thing to keep in mind. We do have to meet the numbers, but it's about meeting the housing needs of the community as a first goal, and then we will make sure that we meet the numbers as a follow-up to that. But yeah, this is uncharted territory as far as what's going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. And well, certainly a challenge. I think it's also a wonderful opportunity for innovation and new thought into how we can make this happen. And in echoing some of the public comment, wanting to make sure that it happens. So I'm seeing, is there any other council comment or commission comment or question? So I'm seeing our city clerk.
I see a hand raised from an attendee that hasn't previously given public comment.
Okay,
she just lowered her hand. Please disregard.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, she just raised her hand again.
Okay, so
do you
let's
want to give Ms.
Sure, I'll open
Stevenson a chance to provide?
Yes, Ed, but if anybody else has public comment, let's put it all together here. So we will take that public comment.
Okay. Mary, I'm going to allow you to speak. You should be able to unmute yourself and address the city council.
Thank you, Cindy. This is Mary Stevenson, also with Our Town St. Helena. I have a question for Mr. Russ. In the past, the housing elements RHNA numbers have been set, but there's been no consequences if you don't meet the RHNA numbers. Has that changed in this cycle? Will there be consequences if St. Helena does not meet the RHNA numbers?
There's two parts of that. One is if you don't satisfy your RHNA number, like from your last housing element, if you didn't end up building that many houses, or are you talking about if we come up short for this upcoming cycle?
I'm talking about both. In the past, we've seldom make our RHNA numbers, but there's no consequences. And am I to understand there'll be a change in this upcoming cycle? And if
There's
so,
no
what
real
are the consequences?
Yeah, there's no real changes in state law that would be against you if you did not come up to the RHNA number that you set previously. The current element, though, if we don't provide the sites or the means to achieve the numbers that we need to have, there are ramifications for that, which could range from financial implications, like your inability to obtain state grant funding, to actual concern from the Attorney General's office. That hasn't been as big an issue so far, but that is being talked about as an avenue to go after some communities. If we don't meet our RHNA number in the 6th cycle as far as our projection, that also makes us a non-certifiable element, which means you have to go through this fund every 4 years instead of every 8 years, and that has cost to the community as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll take one last gander there. Cindy, if there's anybody with public comment, we'll do going once, going twice.
I do not see any hands raised.
Okay, very good. So I will close public comment. We'll bring it back to council and commissioners. And from our last check-in, we didn't see any additional hands. So are there any final comments or questions before we adjourn the meeting? I'm seeing Commissioner Anderson and Councilmember Hardy.
I'm just curious how many units are rolling over from the previous cycle into this one, if any.
We don't have to carry any unmet need from last time. The only time you have to do that is if you didn't actually meet your RHNA last time. That missed number would have to be carried forward. But if you were short X number of units, you don't have to add that to your current RHNA.
Thank you. And Councilmember Hardy?
Yes, I have a question. I don't know if this is really for Mr. Rust or for Mr. Walsh, but following on Mary Stevenson's question, it is my recollection that there was fairly recent state law. I want to say it was SB 92, but I could be wrong about that. That does mandate ministerial approval under certain circumstances if we don't meet certain housing criteria. Am I remembering wrong? Could either of you help with that, please?
There are a number of triggers that put you in an at-right development status. One would be not meeting your, not projecting enough to cover your arena. Could put low-income housing units at a by right circumstance. You also have by rights if you use some sites from your previous elements and carry them forward into the new element. As I mentioned before, underutilized sites from one element and vacant sites from previous two elements. Those also can have a by right aspect if with the projects. There's also some Senate bills that talk about by right approvals for projects. Yeah, if you haven't met all your items, like SB 330 covers aspects of that and what gets to go forward as a by right. The protections that you might get for what you can turn down if you don't have objective design standards, and what you're able to confirm or reject is also limited under state law now. But you're right, there are a number of things that cause some affordable projects to bounce into a ministerial approach.
Well, I would just suggest from my perspective, although that's not a consequence like a daily monetary penalty or some other obviously punitive measure, I think the loss of discretion in project review is going to look like a significant consequence to most. So I think there are real downsides for the community to failing to meet all these housing requirements. That's my thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any final thoughts from council or commissioners? I'm seeing none. So with that, I want to thank Mr. Rust very much and our planning department for working forward on this. This is a great framework, and I think we can be optimistic, and if we work together, we can make things happen over the coming few years here, and using this as a great starting point and starting as quickly as possible to actually produce the housing that we're talking about. So thank you, everybody. And we will adjourn and see each other at our further meetings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maya.
Thank you very much.
Good night.